Everyone believes it was simply burnout, but that's just a front. The true reason entails a huge dispute that took place behind closed doors, a secret that the program would never reveal. Chris Doumitt was for many years the unwavering foundation of Parker Schnabel. In every storm, he was the source of peace. In the gold room, the steady hand who made millions out of mud. However, in season 15, at last, the rock began to fracture. The strain had been increasing for this season. However, Parker Schnaebel's ambition drove him beyond his ultimate. Everything began when Parker made the decision to accomplish something nobody had considered was feasible. He chose to run 3 separate wash plants simultaneously. It was a brilliant move on paper to get more gold. Actually, it produced a nightmare for the supervisor overtoning that gold. Abruptly, Chris was in charge of more than one gold chamber. He was in charge of cleaning up 3 distinct locations. Additionally, these websites are near one another. Among the distance between the plants and this implied that Chris was continuously littering back and forth while moving, attempting to be in the middle of the Klondike 3 locations simultaneously. The amount of work was. A typical cleanup takes a lot of time, difficult work. Pulling large objects is part of it, mats, cleaning them, and cautiously gathering each and every gold speck. Chris now had to perform that task for 3 enormous plants multiple times a week. Who was putting in more hours at work than before, more stressed than ever before previously. He was seen on camera looking wary and irritated. He was overburdened, and he was aware that it was unsustainable. Had told Parker that he needed assistance, that individuals unable to keep up with the workload of 3 processes. Why was this? Even Chris's experience with physical abuse was even worse. Suffering. Many followers are aware that Chris has suffered from severe back issues. That is the reason he left bulky machinery and into the precious metal room to begin with. Operating the loaders and rock trucks made him so much agony that he was unable to no longer. It was intended that the gold room would be a less strenuous occupation. However, Parker was now driving as part of his new plan. All around the claims and carrying out the labor-intensive E3 cleanups being lifted. His physique simply couldn't stand it. He was hurting. He was worn out. Additionally, he was being forced to the brink. The relentless pursuit of gold, a human limit, had been reached. Additionally, that restriction was Chris Doumitt. He had sacrificed everything to the mine, and now he was left with nothing to donate. However, was the labor-intensive the only reason he said enough at last is sufficient? Or was there a something more significant taking place behind the scenes? A dispute that was never captured on video. The narrative the program presents is a devoted combatant who no longer able to bear the strain. However, people close to the operation murmur about an alternative tale, a later, more dramatic one. The true cause of Chris's burden wasn't the only thing that disappeared. It was a shocking revelation involving a huge conflict over money and a basic conflict of ideals between the traditional miner and his youthful boss, a multimillionaire. As Parker started out as a tiny family and built an empire. A multi-million-dollar operation business, the crew dynamic started to alter. The close-knit, Amiable was starting to resemble a company, and that transformation brought about fresh demands. Parker had a more ambitious objective, more than before, pursuing an incredible $40 gold worth $1 million. In order to arrive, he had to exert more effort on his workers and equipment, more so than previously. Here's where the collision of values started. For Chris, a man his life in his late 50s was about more compared to simply the next gold route. He appreciates his well-being, his health, and an equitable day's labor for a just day's compensation. For Parker, a youthful individual, motivated by breaking targets, the emphasis was on figures, effectiveness, and pushing each and every one restriction to optimize earnings. According to rumors, Chris sensed his loyalty and people were taking hard labor for granted. He served as the operation's mainstay, but he was being smashed into the earth without the assistance he required. This resulted into a contentious discussion behind closed doors regarding loyalty and its actual value. Did loyalty mean remaining with the crew, regardless of the personal expense, or was it regarding being devoted to oneself and your personal well-being? Chris found himself thrust into a he observed the procedure turning into a poisonous workplace where the unrelenting search for gold was more significant than those who are extracting it off the earth. He made his own decision. He determined that his health and sanity were worth more than any collection. His silent departure wasn't merely it was a defiant act on opposition to a system he believed had lost its manner. This type of treachery, regardless of factual or simply sensed, has emerged as a theme on the performance. Members of the crew have changed sides previously, severing ties and generating a great deal of drama. Chris's exit sparked a heated discussion among fans. Some said he had every right to abandon a job that was ruining him. Some believed he owed Parker his allegiance, considering how long they had been employed. However, to see why the choice was so important that you must leave. Back to the start of a period of time in the days before Chris Doumitt was a gold miner at all. Prior to Chris Doumitt being he was a legend in the Klondike, Oregon-born carpenter. For 25 years, he served as a proficient plant carpenter, a craftsman with building skills to endure. His exploration of the realm of gold mining was entirely carried out by In 2010, the inaugural season Chris of Gold Rush was employed by the Hoffman team for a straightforward 10-day task to construct a cabin on their property. That his life was profoundly changed by a 10-day job. High reached the claim and right away receive a denting old in the untamed chaotic realm of Hoffman's. In the end, he remained not for 5 months, but for 10 days, while he acquired gold mining skills at that time just by trial and error. Though the Hoffman team was well known for its unwavering stores, malfunctioning equipment, and Dangerous strategies that were rarely successful, it was a chaotic, haphazard enterprise, but for it was a crash course in gold. Chris mining. He witnessed personally how to avoid running a mine. Following his stint with the Chris knew Hoffman like hunting for gold. Nevertheless, he required a more reliable. At that point, he discovered Parker Schnabel. Chris joined in season 4. The team of Parker, and it was an ideal. Parker was the exact opposite of Todd Hoffman. He was rather young, rigorous and efficiency-oriented. Chris, who has made it through the turmoil of the Hoffman years, instantly valued Parker's methodical technique. He went down swiftly, found a groove and emerged as one of Parker's most important teammates. Chris's history is what made him so. Parker finds it valuable. He wasn't merely another competent operator. He was a veteran with a different perspective. He understood firsthand what defeat looked like, and he recognized the significance of carrying out tasks correctly. He wasn't merely there to operate a machine. He was there to assist in creating a solid, prosperous mining enterprise from the very beginning. He had a viewpoint that no one else shared. The crew did. Additionally, this share of the requirements to triumph in the Klondike created an extremely close relationship between the elderly, the young mining genius, and the carpenter. That connection would soon turn into the center of Parker's whole business. Chris Doumitt and his relationship with Parker Schnabel wasn't merely employer and his worker. Throughout the years, it developed into something far more profound. Such as father and son. Chris wasn't simply the guy in the gold chamber. Parker had him as a mentor, his confidant, as well as the ethical guide for the whole gang. This became particularly in honor of Parker's cherished grandfather. John Schnabel is no longer alive. Chris assumed that position, providing quiet knowledge and consistent direction to a young guy bearing the burden of an expanding Gemper on his shoulders. As soon as Parker, when he felt anxious or irritated, he would visit Chris. Chris would be patient, listen, give him space to vent, and then provide a few bits of wisdom that consistently seemed to soothe him. He had a method of taking a broad view, of reminding Parker knew what really mattered. Hueyed his admiration for Parker's power with an authentic uncle-like worry for his health. He was the constant, constructive force that maintained the team-driven. Despite he would laugh around, maintain the attitude, and concentrate on locating answers rather than placing blame on others for issues. However, the conclusive evidence of their relationship, the one thing that demonstrates the astonishing degree of trust between them, relates to the actual gold chamber. The center of the whole thing is the gold room. Activity. There millions of raw gold worth dollars handled each just 1 week. Any other owner of a mine would install security in the room. Cameras, observing every action. However, Parker didn't. Inside a backstage, Parker was questioned about whether he ever thought of installing cameras in the gold space. His response was really telling. He said that in the event that Chris Doumitt retires, he would consider setting up cameras. It says it all. Parker had such great faith in Chris, so without a doubt, he didn't require cameras. He was aware that when Chris was in, every ounce of gold in the room was secure. In order to install a camera, been a slight to their partnership, but this extraordinary trust might have been a curse as well. Parker noticed that Chris wasn't not only as a worker but also as the foundation of his business. He trusted him so strongly that he might not have recognized Chris's stress benefit. The trust itself evolved into yet another kind of pressure. Chris wasn't only exhausted with the job, he had the accountability for millions of dollars, and a young man's unshakable faith considered him a member of their family. When he eventually went beyond his limit, it wasn't only regarding his sore back. It concerned the anxiety of betraying that enormous trust. Parker's finest compliment ever. Perhaps he was the very thing that increased the load that grew too tight to transport, and he felt burdened by it. Wasn't required to carry, because, in contrast to Chris, had an entire life, and many others on the crew beyond the goldfields, awaiting him. In order to fully see why Chris Doumitt might leave behind one of the greatest prosperous gold mines worldwide, you must examine his life away from the His choice wasn't a result of the decision was made by a man with a secure job and other interests life to go back to, in contrast to some of the younger members of the team whose whole lives focused on the time of year for mining. Chris had choices. For 45 years, Chris has been wed to Sharon, his wife. They have 2 kids together, and they have established a solid family life far from the Yukon's machinery and dirt. In the protracted, frigid off-season, Chris and Sharon leave the area and they flee to the sunny, warm Palm Springs, California's weather. Chris is able to unwind there, and he enjoys playing and going fishing, golf, and simply have a little room to take a breath. Chris, however, is more than a family man with some interests. Additionally, he's a shrewd businessman. His affection for a decent and gold fan knows about cigars. He hardly rarely appears without one. However, a lot of individuals are unaware of that. He transformed that enthusiasm into a prosperous company. He was a co-founder of found cigar line known as Doummit Gold Cigars Tradesman. Cigar is the business that company sells a variety of cigars. Bearing titles such as the D10, Gentle Giant and the Negro Oro. He proudly advertises his brand on the program, and it's now actual success with retail establishments be cigars and the United States are not his sole endeavors. Chris is also a wine expert. He enjoys good wine so much that he began producing his own, which he affectionately called Huge. He is a male-multi-talented individual, a carpenter, a gold miner, a marksman, and bossiness owner. His estimated net worth around $600,000, and he receives roughly $25,000 on every he makes an appearance in a Gold Rush episode. Every Bodathese depicts a man who didn't require Parker's intellect to live. He had a comfortable life and a loving family. Amid the sunlight and his own prosperous, he possessed the resources and individual liberty to put his own joy. When the work began to take a toll on his physical and mental well-being, he passes the resources and strength to walk away. He held a position of authority. Heckled put his own health ahead of the empire of another man. However, the narrative didn't stop there. One last startling rumor that turns his departure from a straightforward decision into an action, or ultimate treachery. In the competitive close-knit world of loyalty in Klondike, gold mining is everything. Crews resemble families, and bosses are similar to generals in charge of their troops into combat. Getting off your crew is a significant issue, but abandoning your crew to joining your fiercest opponent is an act of conflict. And that's the last explosive. The rumor about Chris Doumitt, according to the account, he didn't simply give up. Parker Schnabel was left to join the squad of Rick Ness. If this rumor is indeed, it transforms everything. It changes a tearful farewell turned into a startling betrayal. Chris was Parker's for more than 10 years, most reliable man. He guarded their details. The individual who was aware of their internal and external functioning. To accept that information and expertise to a competing camp would be unimaginable. It would feel less like switching careers and more akin to a back of the knife. Parker and Rick Nesnabel's history is lengthy and intricate. Past. They are constantly rivals. Battling for the greatest terrain, the best, largest gold totals, and the crew. For Chris, switching sides would be extremely a Klondike power move. It would give Rick a significant edge and offer a severe setback for Parker, not only to his venture but to his ego. Nobody noticed it's coming. Chris Doumitt's concept, the Parker's crew's father figure, dressed and wearing a different hat and serving that seemed impossible to compete. However, in the Gold Rush era, where wealth are created and destroyed each season, alliances are always changing. Whether is this rumor accurate, or is it merely a dramatic narrative produced for television? Its existence demonstrates how profoundly Chris sensed leaving. It wasn't only jealous of an excellent employee, it marked the conclusion of a time period. It rocked the base of Parker's crew and abandoned them all, pondering the possibilities. The steady, composed man who held all of it was gone. Additionally, in his location was a tale of treachery that would be discussed in the Klondike because years to come. Ultimately, the actual Chris Doumitt's explanation for leaving Parker Schnabel is a tale about boundaries. In the persistent search for millions of money, he discovered the more precious one in gold. Something. He was at ease with himself. He exchanged the safety of an empire of gold miners for the peace of a more tranquil existence. After years of dedicating himself to someone else, he picked himself as the man's dream.